Okay, so today's daf yomi is Nedarim daf pei test Nedarim 89. As we're marching through Maseches Nedarim, and as Hashem Yisparach, we're going to finish this Masechta on Tuesday. So the Mishnah tells us on the bottom of Peches Amud Beis, on the bottom of 88b, the Neder Amana Ugrusha Yakum Aleh, a vow of a widow or a divorcee, yakum eleha, that under those circumstances, if she makes a vow, that the vow will be upheld, that her husband, well, she has no husband, cannot divorce her, so cannot reject her vow. Her husband, but this is obviously the case because she is a widow or divorcee. So the Gemara is going to say we have to learn what this pasuk is really teaching us. Well, first of all, we should note it's not actually a pasuk. The pasuk tells us. The actual pasuk tells us from Midbar chapter 30, the vow of a widow or divorcee, whatever she prohibits on herself, will be upheld. So the Gemara elides the words into making it into one phrase, but it's clearly not an actual verse. It's v'neder almana u'grusha kol asher asra nafsha yakum aleha. So the widow or divorcee's vow cannot be rejected. But what's this case referring to? Obviously, her husband can't reject her vow. She doesn't have a husband. So the Gemara says, Kate said, what are we referring to? Says the Mishnah. So Amra, Araini Nazira. The Mishnah is referring to a case where she says, let's say I will be a Nazirite after 30 days, I will be a Nazirite. If she says I will be a Nazirite after 30 days, even though she's going to get married in those 30 days, he can't reject the vow. So let's say she's divorced, but she knows she has a set. She's getting married in 2 weeks. And then she says now, right before 2 weeks out from the marriage, she says, I'll be a Nazirite after 30 days. So she's going to become married during that time period. So you might have thought that the husband can reject the vow when they get married. So we're saying no. That according our Mishnah is saying we go after not when the vow takes effect, which the Ran calls the chalos haneder, when the vow takes effect. No, we go after the amiras haneder, when she makes the vow. And when she makes the vow, she's not married to the husband, and so therefore the husband cannot reject the vow even if he's there on the day that the vow takes effect. Since he was not married on the day of the statement of the vow, he cannot reject the vow on the day that the vow takes effect. We go after the amiras haneder, not the chalos haneder. You got a question?
What did you say the ultimate ruling is?
Oh, so we'll get to that. So we'll get to that at the end of the Gemara. But we're going to paskin like this position. Gemara is going to say that this is a dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Shmuel. We're going to say that the Ran rules like Rabbi Akiva. So Nadra says the second case is Nadra v'Hibur Shesabal. The reverse. She's getting married. She is married now. She's married and she makes a vow, then made for law. Then the husband can reject the vow. Again, this is an obvious rule. So it must be, says the Mishnah, that we're talking about an unusual case. What's the unusual case? Kate said, what's the unusual case? Amra, that she said, Hareini Niziro Yom. She knows she's got a divorce scheduled, let's say, or she knows her husband is he's basically on the deathbed. She knows he's about to die. She knows that they're pulling the plug, so to speak. And so she says she'll be a Nazirite 30 days out from now. So is almana and even though we know when the vow is going to take effect, she's not going to be married. She's going to be widowed or divorced within those 30 days. And the vow will not take effect then because her husband is clearly not going to be her husband at that point. Nevertheless, Arezem Mufar. We're going to say that the husband can reject the vow again because our Mishnah is saying we follow the amiras haneder when the vow is said and not the chalos haneder, not when the vow takes effect. Nadra bo bayom v'niskarsha bo bayom and hechzira bo bayom. So now the Mishnah tells us a third law. Let's say there's a lot going on this day. She gets married that day, and on this day that she gets married, she makes this vow. Then she gets divorced that day, and then she gets remarried to the same man that same day. So she's married vows. She gets married. She vows, I'm a Nazarite. Then she gets divorced. Then she remarries the husband. The husband says, you know what? You're a Nazarite. I want to reject that vow. He cannot reject the vow anymore. He lost his opportunity once he divorced her. And then even though he remarried her, it's not considered the day he heard it anymore. He lost his opportunity to annul the vow. He cannot annul the vow, and the Mishnah tells us why. Any woman who goes into her own domain, meaning to say she got divorced, she's now her own, and she's not under the jurisdiction of her husband. When she went there for sha'achas, when she went there for one moment, she's no longer able to reject the vow. She's left the jurisdiction of being a married woman, and so therefore that vow that she made in the first case is no longer applicable. She can no longer reject that vow. He can no longer reject that vow once she got divorced, even though he remarries her on the same day. So we've seen that our Mishnah says we follow the Amiras Aneder this time when the vow is stated, and not the Chalos Aneder, not the time when the vow is made. But the Gemara says we have a Brisa which says that seems to indicate this is actually a dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. What does the Brisa say? The Brisa tells us the following. Tanya, we have in the Brisa, Amano Grusha Sha'amar Hareini Naziro Kashay Nase. Here's a widow or divorcee, and they have a marriage that's set for later this week. And then she says, I'm going to become a Nazirite when I get married. And then she gets married that week. So Rabbi Yishmael says, you're fair. Rabbi Yishmael says, the husband can reject the vow, even though she made it before, even though she made the vow before she was married to him, he can reject it. But Rabbi Kiva Omer lo yafer. Rabbi Kiva says he cannot reject the vow. And the Gemara is assuming at this point that what we must be saying is that Rabbi Yishmael says we follow the Chalos HaNeder. And Rabbi Kiva says we follow the Amiras HaNeder. Rabbi Yishmael says we follow when the vow takes effect. And therefore, since the vow takes effect on the day that she gets married, therefore the husband, that's the day that he's married to her, so therefore he can reject the vow. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says we follow the statement of the neder, and so therefore, since that was not the day, she was not married to him at that point, he cannot reject the vow. You had a question, Bill?
So this is they've switched. It's the complete opposite. They're each taking the opposite position.
No, Rabbi Akiva is consistent with the position of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yishmael is arguing with our Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva says we follow the Amiras HaNeder, and Rabbi Yishmael is saying we follow the Chalos HaNeder.
Rabbi Yishmael previously said we follow the Amira.
No, he has not said that. Rabbi Yishmael has not said we follow the Amira. Rabbi Akiva said we have. This is the first time in our daf we're introducing their positions. But Rabbi Akiva is saying we follow the Amiras HaNeder, and Rabbi Yishmael, which is consistent with our Mishnah, and Rabbi Yishmael seems to be saying.
You're talking about that. I'm talking about the Mishnah.
The Mishnah didn't record anybody's position, but we're going to associate that at this point, it looks very clearly like our Mishnah is consistent with Rabbi Akiva, who says we follow the Amiras HaNeder, whereas Rabbi Yishmael seems to be saying we only follow the Chalos HaNeder when the vow takes effect. So Rabbi Akiva is saying we follow the Amiras HaNeder. And so therefore, Rabbi Akiva is saying in this case, where she makes a vow, when she gets married, Rabbi Akiva says, since at this moment she's not married, therefore he can't reject the vow on the day they get married. Whereas Rabbi Shmuel says that he can because we follow the Chalos HaNeder. And the Gemara says, I'll give you a simon to remember this. The simana Yoloi. The simana is Yoloi. The simon is a mnemonic, a way to remember it. Simon means simanim are ways to remember. It's a sign of something. So Rabbi Shmuel positions before Rabbi Akiva, and he says Yafer, and then Rabbi Akiva says Lo Yafer. And in the next case, Rabbi Shmuel is going to say Lo Yafer, Rabbi Akiva is going to say Yafer, and that's because it's the opposite case. So in the next case, what does she say? She says Ashes is. She is married. In the second case, she's married at the time, but she knows that she's scheduled a divorce proceeding for next week. So she's married, but she knows she's getting divorced. So she says, Hareini Naziro Sheskaris. Once I'm done with this man, I'm going to be a Nazarite on the day I get divorced. Vinis Garsha, and then she gets divorced. So Rabbi Yishmael says, at the day she makes the vow, she's married, doesn't matter. Well, Yafer, the husband cannot reject the vow because the vow will take effect only after she's married. When there's the Chalos HaNeder, he's not going to be married to her, so he can't reject the vow. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says Yafer, Rabbi Akiva says he can reject the vow because we follow the Amiras HaNeder. And even though the vow is supposed to take effect only after she's divorced, at this moment she is married. And so therefore we follow the Amira, so Neder we can reject it. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yishmael says, I'll tell you my logic. My logic that we follow the Chalos and Neder is based upon the verse. The verse states, Harei Omer v'neder almana u'grusha. It says the vow of a widow or a divorcee. That's the vow that we will uphold. Yakum aleh, meaning to say, Ad sheyen neder b'shas almanas u'grushin. That Rabbi Yishmael is saying that the vow only takes effect on what we go follow the upholding of the vow. And so therefore we follow the chalos and neder. That's what Rabbi Yishmael is saying. It says following the chalos and neder. Meaning to say that's Rabbi Yishmael's position. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, Harei omer ko asher asral nafsha, whenever she prohibits it on herself. When do we say that he cannot reject the vow? If when she makes the vow, the prohibition of the vow is when it's during the time of the widow or the divorcee. So Rabbi Akiva is saying we follow the Amira Saneder. So it says Rav Chisda, let's take a straight reading of our dispute in the Brisa between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, that Rabbi Yishmael seems to be saying Chalos Saneder. Rabbi Akiva is saying following the Amira Saneder. It must be that our Mishnah, which says we follow the statement of the vow and not the Chalos of the Neder, must be that our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. He says Rav Chisda must nisin Rabbi Akiva. He says it's a simple reading of our Mishnah. Then our Mishnah follows position of Rabbi Akiva. Abaye says, no, it's not necessarily the case that our Mishnah follows the position of Rabbi Akiva. Amar Abaye Amar, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yishmael. You could even say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yishmael, because there's actually a subtle difference between the Mishnah and the Brisa. The Mishnah talked about, I'll say it outright, and then we'll say it inside. We'll say it outside, and we'll say it inside. Our Mishnah talked about where she says, I'm going to become an Alman or Grusha. I'm going to become a Nazirite after 30 days from now. So if at the time when she makes that vow, or she says, I'm going to take, or in 30 days, she says, I'll become a Nazirite. So even though she's going to become married within those 30 days, he can't annul it. So Rabbi Yishmael might agree with that case, because there's a difference between our case. In our case, in the Mishnah, maybe she'll get married, maybe she won't, because she connected it to days, and so therefore it's possible that she won't get married. And so the Rabbi Yishmael says it might not affect him at all. So therefore he might not be able to reject the vow. Whereas in the case of the Brisa, she says, when I get married, I'll be a Nazarite. Well, that's completely dependent upon the husband, and so therefore the husband might have the ability to reject the vow. So they'll read it inside. Abai says, "Afilu tema Rabbi Yishmael must nisin." Afilu tema Rabbi Yishmael. You could even say our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yishmael must nisin. Talia navshe biyome. Our Mishnah connected this dispute to days, and so therefore Brisa Talia navshe b'nisuin. Talia navshe b'nisuin. But the Brisa connected it to when she's married, and so therefore. So Shalme Yomi Vonisgarshe, Shalme Yomi Vomisnaba. So it's possible that in the Mishnah that she won't get married, won't get divorced. So it's not dependent upon the husband necessarily. And so therefore it might be that Rabbi Shimon would say in that case we follow the Amira, the statement of the vow, and not the Chalos and or not the actual vow. And as Bill asked before, one second, we'll come to your question in a few minutes. Just hold the question. Let me George, what's your question? What's your question, George?
My question is the intent of the person, the woman, at all a factor? Because maybe you could impute to her the knowledge that when she gets married, her husband will be allowed to nullify the divorce, the vow.
So hold on, let me just mute you because I'm getting back right now. I'll answer your question. It's a good question, but the answer is that the rabbis, that this is not a case of intent, because this is based upon the verse, that the verse says that the wife, when the husband can annul the wife's vow. So we want to know what the parameters of that nullification are. Do we follow it can only be done when he's married to her, but do we follow the statement of the vow or the taking effect of the vow? So this is not a case where the intent of the person making the vow is relevant. It's a case of how do we apply the verse here. So, I muted you.
I guess my question is a little bit broader than this case, which is, in general, is the intent, if the intent, do you impute to the woman who's making the vow a knowledge that her husband could nullify the vow.
Yes, so here too, we would say that it's relevant to a certain degree. It's relevant to the fact that we say that we've had this phrase in the Talmud. Every woman who makes a vow, al das bala he noderis. She makes the vow knowing that her husband is a factor in her life. But we don't necessarily take we don't necessarily ask her, because what we say is once she utters the words, it's not necessarily what she intended to say, it's what we objectively think about what she said. And then we don't go back and ask her. That's never the case in Maseches Nedarim. We never go back and say, what were you thinking? That's not relevant anymore. Once she makes the vow, it's like the difference between the words you say and the words you thought to say.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
George, was a great question. So to two points. One is based on what you just said. This is distinct, for example, from Pigul, when the Kohanim are offering a korban, and their intent is not pure. Their intent matters in that case. It's not just what they do, but what their intent was when they do it. Right? In this case, it is actually the utterance that comes out of the mouth, regardless of the intent, and therefore it is in the ear of the receiver.
Exactly
at
right.
that level.
Yes. Very nice.
The second point I just wanted to make, which is a very, very minor one, is related to the mechlochis between the Mishnah and the Baraita, is that in one case, in the Mishnah's case, it is relative time. In the Baraita's case, it's absolute time. It's based on a trigger of an event versus a counting off of a relative time.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the distinction that Abaye makes. So yeah, Yasher Koach, very nice. So now very nice. So we continue that the Gemara, the Mishnah says Zaklal, that the Mishnah said a case that where she was married and then she made a vow, then divorced, and then remarried, he can't annul the vow anymore, because once she goes out of her husband's jurisdiction for one moment, he can no longer has the ability to reject the vow. So the Gemara points out that this time the phrase in Nedarim, this is not the first time in Nedarim where it says in the Mishnah that Ze'akal, this is the general rule, that it also said it back on Ayin Aleph Amid Aleph. It said it with respect to the Nara Hamurasa, where it says in that chapter, Ze'akal, the Katani Gabi Nara Hamurasa, it says the same principle. This is the general rule with respect to the chapter of the woman who was betrothed, that it says that as long as she didn't go into her own domain for 1 minute, then her father and her husband together can annul her vow. Asuya is coming to include a case where she left her father's home and she went with the emissaries of the husband to his home. So there, it comes to include the case where her father went with the emissaries of her husband, or the emissaries of the father went with the emissaries of the husband. Because since they were still walking with her, since she's still going with the emissaries, we're not going to assume that it's considered like she was in her own domain at that point. And so therefore, then under those circumstances, we say that since even though she left her father's domain, but since she's still going with his emissaries, she's still going to be considered like she's under his jurisdiction, and so therefore her father and her husband can still reject her vow. And what about the case where it says Ze'akal here? The whole phrase Ze'akal comes to include another case. So Ze'akal, the Katami Gabi Be'elu Nedarim, where it says Ze'akal with respect to Elu Nedarim, Lasuye, it's coming to include the following case. Maser Av L'Shuchei Abal, where the father had sent the Maser Av L'Shuchei Abal, the father had sent the Nara Murasa to the emissaries of the husband, Shemaser Shuchei Av L'Shuchei Abal, or the emissaries of the father had sent her to the emissaries of the husband. Then She'ena Baal Mefer Bekom, and then at that point she's considered to be like she's married anymore. And at this point, the husband would not be able to, because by Nisuin, when it's a full marriage, we say you cannot reject any vows that were made prior to that point. And so now we come to this next Mishnah. The Mishnah is Teisha Naros. It's an unusual Mishnah because the commentaries say that a lot of these cases we can figure out. The Gemara itself says that we don't even need all these cases in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to give us 9 cases where the vow is upheld and they cannot be, and the father or the husband can't reject the vow. But we don't even need all these 9 cases. We can figure out most of them on our own. So why are these cases here? The Ran says just l'chaded. We're just trying to sharpen they're trying to sharpen the students. And so therefore that's what he says. We're just trying to sharpen ourselves as a way of reviewing. So we should know all the cases, but a lot of them are obvious. As a basic rule, the father can only annul the vow while the girl is a minor and before she's fully married. So we'll see these cases of the Mishnah. Teisha Naros. There are 9 Naros, 9 cases.
Wait, I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
What? What do you want me to say?
Before you said the 9 cases, you said if she's a minor and.
If she's a minor and she's not, and if she's a minor, the father can annul the vow. When she's not a minor, he can't annul the vow. And if she's fully married, the father can't annul the vow anymore. So now we're going to list the cases that her vows cannot be annulled anymore. So just as a general principle, so what's a general principle where the father, where there's no ability to annul her vow? One is where if she becomes an adult, her father cannot annul it, or her father died. Or if she's, the third case is she's Yisoma B'chaye'av. What's a Yisoma B'chaye'av? An orphan while her father's still alive. What's that case? Let's say she was married off by her father, and then she became widowed or divorced from her husband. And now she's on her own. And so then we're going to say, even though she's still a minor, her father doesn't have the ability to annul her vow anymore. So what are these cases? The first case is Bogeris. Let's say she becomes an adult. There are 9 cases where Nara, where a young girl, where her vow is valid. Bogeris. Let's say she's an adult. Vihi Yisoma, and she became an orphan while her father's still alive. Meaning, say she was already married off once. Her father lost the ability to annul her vow, even if she's a minor. Case number 2 is Nara. She made the vow while she was a Nara, but between the age of 12 and 12 and a half, and then Ubagra, and then she became an adult. Vihi Yisoma, and so now she's an orphan while her father is still alive. So we're saying under these circumstances, and then her father heard the vow, he cannot do it. Why? Because she's an adult. And so therefore, and also because she's Yisoma B'chaye'av, the father died. So third case, or the father didn't die, but she got divorced at that point. Third case is Nara Shelo Bagra. Let's say she made the vow while she's not yet an adult, but she didn't become an adult, but she's an orphan while her father is still alive. Meaning to say she got married, and while she was married, she became widowed or divorced while she's still a Nara, then the father or the husband cannot reject the vow. Well, there's no husband anymore. Number 4 is Bogeres, she becomes an adult. Umei and her father's dead. Again, the vow cannot be rejected. Case number 5, Nara, she's between 12 and 12 and a half when she makes the vow, and then she becomes an adult, Bogeres, Umei and then her father dies, then he cannot annul the vow. Number 6, Nara Shalabagar. Let's say she's a Nara, she's between 12 and 12 and a half, but she didn't become an adult. Umei Savia, and then her father dies while she's still a Nara. So then he cannot reject the vow. And number 7 is Nara Shemeis Avia. Let's say she's a Nara, and then her father dies. Umishemeis Avia, and then after her father dies, Bagar, she becomes an adult. Well, then, of course, he can't annul the vow because he's dead, and also because she's an adult. And number 8 is Bogeres. She becomes an adult, Via Kayam, and her father's still alive. Well, he can't annul the vow because she's an adult. And number 9 is Nara Bogeres. She's a Nara, and then she becomes an adult. Via Kayam, her father's still alive. Well, guess what? He can't annul the vow because she's an adult. And like I said before, like we said, Rabbi Yehuda says, Afa Mesi Bito Tana, and the Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Yehuda is not really arguing with the Chachamim. He's just saying it like this, saying it differently. He says, Afa Mesi Bito Akatana, somebody who marries off their minor daughter, Vinasalmano Niskarsha, and then she becomes widow or divorced. Adayin hinara. He cannot annul her vows because since she married, she left his rishus. That's the exact case of what we call Yusoma b'chaye ha'av. Remember, we have that from the very first daf in Yevamos on the bottom of Beis and Yevamos. Rashi says this is the case of what's called Yusoma b'chaye ha'av. She's an orphan while her father's still alive, meaning to say the father only gets the rights to her when he marries while she's betrothed the first time. And if she became widowed or divorced, even if she's a minor, he loses the rights. And the Gemara says that, which we learned in our Mishnah, that these are 9 cases. Rabbi Yehuda, that's only the position of Rabbi Yehuda. And the Chacham say there are the three narrows whose vows are upheld, that they cannot be rejected. Meaning all these cases can really be just broken up into just 3 cases. What are these 3 cases? A Bogeris, Yisoma, and Yisoma B'chaya'af. That if she's a Bogeris, if she's an adult, the father cannot annul her vow. He loses the right. Yisoma, if her father dies, her vows cannot be annulled by her father. Yisoma B'chaya'af, or if her father married her off and then she became widowed or divorced, even if she's still a minor, her vows cannot be rejected. So we'll just do this Mishnah. This is the Mishnah says, Konem she'eni nana la'aba u'avicha im osani al picha. Let's say she says, I take a vow that I'm not going to have any benefit from my father or your father if I will give any benefit to you. Meaning, if I'm going to give any benefit to you, which is a vow beino beina, then I'm not going to be able to get any benefit from my father or your father. Or if she says, she'eni nenes lecha, I'm not going to get any benefit from you, im osani al pi aba v'avicha, that if she's going to give any benefit to her father-in-law, she's not going to be allowed to get any benefit from her husband. Under both those cases, hareza yafer, the husband can reject the vow. Why? Because since our Mishnah says, is like the Chachamim, that the husband can reject the vows of his wife even prior to them actually taking place, because it's called kedumim. And since these vows will take effect because of inoy nefesh or affliction or vows between him and her, therefore he's going to be able to reject the vow. Okay, we're going to stop here the recording. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them.